and I went to seminary together, and it's always nice to know people who become important when you're in seminary, and Andy is important.
We both know other people who become important.
Andy is the Bishop of Texas, and to give you a picture of that, the Diocese of Texas is, I think, the largest diocese in the Episcopal Church.
In some ways.
And has an incredible ministry in Houston, Austin, and elsewhere. So, and one of the things that I love about my friendship with Andy is he and I have tracked in our interests. So, before, as we were getting to know each other, Andy had an art school background, which I found interesting. And then when I started my PhD studies, Andy and his wife Joanne moved us up to New Haven and left me these two beautiful icons that I treasure that he gave to me. And it's been really moving and lovely for me to see that Andy's interest in art and spirituality continues. So I'm really happy to have him here and to give us a chance. I realized that my presentation last week was a little interruptive to the normal Rector's Forum, so hopefully we're going to bring back you all into the fold. So without further ado, here's Andy.
Thank you. As Bill said, we have had a wonderful past together, and I've just continued to deepen our friendship, and especially we're really energized right now about a conversation that he and I are having around the arts. Most of my life today is spent around organizational thinking and strategies and rethinking the systems and structures of the church, but the arts have always had a particular place in my heart, especially since my own background is with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and this is just an example of one of my pieces. Really, if I think about how I connect into the art, it really is through some sense of abstract expressionism, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about that today in terms of the conversation I'm having in my head about where we are both as culture, both in the art world, but then to touch on a little bit around the ideas and notions of spirituality, the spirituality in the arts, or maybe spirituality of art. So I'm going to play with some of those ideas and thoughts as we go along. And I think the first thing to really talk about or think about, if you will, is the idea of what is art. And so I want to make sure that I'm clear about the conversation and where it lies for me, is that art in some way it's not about taste. So I want to reject the idea that art is itself somehow about personal taste. I'm not kind of rejecting the idea that you can like or not like something. That's not what I'm saying. But that if we're really to get down into what is the nature of art, that it's not about individual taste or fads or seasons in terms of art history, but rather that art is a category of space. It's a category of poetry, of motion, of literature, of painting, and that art itself in some way connected with the philosopher Kierkegaard, though I don't agree with all of Kierkegaard's aesthetic, his ideas around art. I like the phrase. It says that art is a sense of the coinciding, if you will, and repetition of life itself. That somehow art is deeply connected in this way of imitating or repeating life experience, the other. And so when I give you a fancy word you can throw around at dinner parties, mimesis, which means to imitate, it's a Greek word, means to imitate or repeat, and it's deeply rooted in Plato's own understanding of what art is. This idea that it comes from something and is a repetition of something. I do want to say that there are some major points and shifts within art history itself. In the 1930s, Walter Benjamin, in an essay entitled "The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction," argued in the absence of any traditional ritualistic value, art in the age of mechanical reproduction would inherently be based on the practice of politics. John Berger continued in this direction with his essay, Ways of Seeing, in which he criticizes traditional Western cultural aesthetics, the study of beauty, by raising questions about hidden ideologies in visual arts. So the idea that this mechanical revolution that we went began to do something to art itself. It had some implication on art, which we see. Now, I want to play just a little bit more with this idea. Do you all know the movie American Beauty? Yeah? Some of you? So remember this, for those who've seen it. I'll stop talking here in a second. We'll hope that YouTube doesn't come up with anything.
Just turn that up a bit, Andy.
Yeah.
Not to be your AV guy.
Be my AV guy. I think it's all the way up.
It's one of those days where it's a minute away from snowing. There's this electricity in the air. Everyone's here. And this bag is just dancing with me. Like a little kid begging me to play with it. For 15 minutes. Yesterday I realized that there was this entire life behind these. And this incredibly benevolent force who wanted me to know that there was no reason to be afraid. Never. Video's a poor excuse, I know. But it helps me remember. I need to remember.
So the idea here, Alan Ball, the director and writer of American Beauty, actually had this moment when he didn't have a video camera handy, but he says that you think it's about this is the quote, you think it's about this, but it's about something else, and you're feeling it. Oh, and underneath it is all about this whole sort of what's the nature of reality, and there's this kind of metaphysical thing. He says, I was totally expecting him to just sort of go catatonic and fall out of his chair as he was explaining the idea, the core nature of what became the film American Beauty. So the producer said, well, you should make that film, and threw away a script that he was actually producing. And part of what Ball is trying to do is to talk in this film about this kind of antiseptic, empty nature of American culture, and yet there is always something behind it and something beautiful in our midst. In an interview, he said, I actually had this encounter with a plastic bag. I didn't have a video camera like Ricky does, but I'm sure some people would look at it and go, what a psycho. But it was very intense and a very real moment. And then he says, there's a Buddhist notion, and I would say a Christian notion as well, this is his quote, of the miraculous within the mundane. And I think we certainly live in a culture that encourages not to look at that at all. And so this idea somehow, I love the phrases in the film about repetition, about how it seems to be pointing to something else, about the beauty that is encapsulated in watching this bag, and how he attempts to capture in some way the sense of that moment just before it snows and what that feels like. And so as he describes it, as we watch that, we have this full image, if you will, an art moment in which what Ball experienced and then turned into film leads us to seek, to wonder about, to be curious about. Now, one of the things that happened in the midst of the great art history movement as we look at it is art for art's sake. You all know Marcel Duchamp's fountain work, right? Again, going back, maybe perhaps touching on this mechanical age, this concept that a rejection of everything that had led up to this moment in art. And just to say that, a lot of people look at it and think, I don't even understand that. I really like this phrase that while the academic painters of the 19th century felt an obligation to improve society by presenting images that reflected conservative moral values, examples of virtuous behavior and Christian sentiments, modernists demanded freedom to choose their subject matter and style of painting. And so it really is a rejection of the church being in charge of what is beautiful, what is art, and what is to be accepted as virtuous. So when we look at that and we think about the art movement itself, it is deeply about the artists reclaiming their ability to make or to repeat or to create images about the world in which they live. In other words, it is to say it's not simply about an experience of the past, but it's about my experience in the midst of life that I'm now projecting. Of course, Marcel Duchamp's fountain would be rejected by another group, which is one of my favorite groups, which is the abstract expressionists, right? Which said, wait a minute now, we might agree with you, right, that the church shouldn't be in charge of determining what's beautiful, but art is never simply just an object to be looked at and to have value placed on, but that art itself is somehow attempting to draw into this world that which is other, the transcendent. And so the response, of course, came from the abstract expressionists and their work, Mark Rothko being a key leader in this, and trying to reject this idea. And I think many of you probably know Rothko's work, especially his color field paintings, right, in which he tries to evoke emotion as you look. Now we have in Houston the Rothko Chapel, which has these huge Rothko paintings. It's a very spiritual and holy place in which you're just surrounded by these mammoth color field paintings. And just to say, to create that Mark Rothko sought to create some sense of transcendental feelings of awe and wonder, or a heightened state of consciousness on the part of the viewer. Rothko quoting a quote of Rothko's, "The basic human emotions of tragedy, ecstasy, and doom," and trying to capture them in the midst of these paintings. Now, just to shift again a little bit, just in my head, to this. Do you all know this movie? So I'm looking at. You all know this guy?
At last, welcome you. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus. It's not to meet you. No, the honor is mine. Please, come.
Do y'all know this movie, The Matrix? Some of you? No, you haven't seen it. You're going to have to go home and watch. You're going to say, oh my gosh, Bishop, I should have seen this.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. You can see that. I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he's a spectator of it. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate?
No,
Why not?
because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel. You felt it your entire life. There's something wrong with it. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter. Try. It's this feeling that's broken to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Hatred.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window, or when you turn on the television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. That you are a slave, like everyone else. You were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch.
So the concept in the movie is a dystopian film, right? And the idea is that the machines have taken over the world, and they've actually created a universe, if you will, in which they use the energy from human beings to power all the machines, while, on the other hand, you live in this other pretend world that seems like it is about something, but it really has no value other than benign servitude to the machines. And so part of what Morpheus is getting ready to do is give Neo a pill, which is going to wake him up and pull him out of this world of meaninglessness. Now, what the Wachowski brothers, who are the producers of the film called The Matrix, are doing is they're actually depending upon some deep aesthetic philosophy by a man named Baudrillard, who wrote an essay called Simulacres et Simulation. And the book, the essay, is about how art itself, when it's first created, is deeply attached from that which it comes from. This idea that it is rooted, as I've been talking about. It's a repetition of life, of experience, of the world, but in the second creation of that art. So when you reproduce that art, what happens is it begins to become disconnected from its original, the power of its original reflection, right? So in the second one, it still looks like it, but it has become even more separated from the original expression. And so the third kind of evolution is that actually it becomes the commodification of the image itself, rather than a complete ownership of the image by the individual, separating it from what it originally represented. So you actually have a hollow symbol that we all can own. And so you think about this a little bit, and you might think of the reproduction of art pieces, which harken back to some original piece, but there's nothing like seeing the original, right? Everything always fails in comparison to seeing the original. So now that we can have a postcard, I can have a screensaver, I can have all kinds of images of great art pieces, but what Baudrillard is saying is that the more we reproduce them, the more empty they become. And this film is this idea that as the mechanical world continues to reproduce and commodify things, that it actually removes all meaning, so that we become these benign citizens living in a world that we know something's not quite right and it's not quite connected, but that the simulation itself just continues to deteriorate. And so some of you may remember this great movie and book, Dorian Gray. Do any of y'all remember the essay, small little tract, Dorian Gray, about the man who lives forever? Meanwhile, upstairs in the attic is a painting that shows his true deteriorating self as a child. I thought this was an amazing film. So the idea here again is that somehow we are, as we reproduce and move away from our own art-making selves, right? That from our own narrative sharing as our own creating expressions, as we just become cogs in a wheel of a society doing our part, etc., and move ourselves away, we too are somewhat deteriorating. And we then would maybe ask or seek to find or discover what is happening. What is happening in the world? Why is this taking shape? And I really find the words of Charles Taylor particularly helpful. He says, "We live within an immanent order that is completely self-referential. Our experience rules and navigates decisions and has created a wall from any outside intervention, bidden or not bidden. We are self-sufficient and individually focused. The faces of those around us have vanished, replaced by projections and stories of our own making." Taylor writes, "We're no longer a porous self in an enchanted world as part of a cosmos. This means we are cut off from our surrounding and our neighbors and our experiences and our stories." And so part of what I think the spirituality of art, or art as spirituality, begins to help us unpack and unload, is to move outside of that self-referential way of being, to move towards the other, right? So rather than saying it's about taste, are we able to open ourselves up to the other and the expression of some real life? So as you think about performance artists especially, or musicians, that may be a little clear. What you do is when you go to participate and to watch and to take in, you actually are experiencing, if you will, the narrative story that's beyond you, that speaks to you from outside of yourself. And if you can open yourself up to that engagement, we begin to reclaim some of that beauty and sharing a life that is filled with it. Now, this is a very important piece because in some way for us, I think, as Christians, I love this picture of Christ appearing in the midst of industrial workers in the 1930s. As von Balthasar would remind us, now part of what this is that we're undertaking is, as Christians who believe in the incarnation, where God becomes man, where the Word is alive and moving within the creation, then in some way what we see is always looking for the incarnation in art itself. So how is the Christ being reflected, repeated in the expression, whether it be music or painting or sculpture or performance? How is the Christ being perfected? I was telling Bill this morning, it's crazy what we end up talking about at 7 in the morning. But I was explaining that I think part of this is that we really want and desire to reject any vulgar expression saying that's not art because it offends me. And yet, actually, as Christians who have at our center the death of the Messiah on a cross, that vulgarity is actually rooted deeply in our incarnational way of understanding the world. And so to open ourselves up to experience the death, suffering, pain, and vulgarity of the world and other art is no easy spiritual task, but it is as if we are bearing witness to another's crucifixion and are invited, and kind of applying von Balthasar's idea of the incarnation of living Word in art. What we're doing is we're actually experiencing the ugliness, which is very much a part of our world. Now, to give you a break from all of that, just for a moment. We have to go, let's do haystacks, right? So, okay, thank goodness. We're going back to something a little bit better. These are, of course, Monet's haystacks. But here again, now this, this is not, how many of you all have ever seen these actually in person? Any of you all have ever seen the haystacks, right? I mean, these are amazing, amazing pieces. And what I want to do here is just show you, right, so they're haystacks. It's the repetition of haystacks, right? So he repeated haystacks at different times of the day, at different seasons, with snow on them in the summer. But this idea, I think, and I like Catherine Pigstock, she's a present-day theologian from the UK. She says, if the haystack is only apparent to me insofar as I can imagine it as differently shapes or colors, right? If I can just take this as, oh, these are just different shapes and colors of haystacks, she's implying, then by what warrant do I say that this imagination arises only in my mind and not also as a kind of emanation of the haystack itself, as if the haystack is something that comes into reality as I experience it. Now, I don't know if any of you, in Texas, I know about hay. I mean, we literally would go looking for things in the hay at church fairs, right? So, I don't know if you've ever smelled hay, have a sense of hay is itchy, right? But when I look at the haystacks, I have a whole experience of hay that comes alive in me because of my experience. I know what it's like on a summer day, and what the hay, when it's really hot, the hay has a fragrance to it, right? So all of a sudden, as in an industrial society in which most people don't have any experience in hay, but if you were to go back to Monet's time, this would have been an amazing thing, because it's actually to evoke the very nature of the hay itself as the sun beats on it, or as the cold freezes upon it. So I love the idea, as Catherine Pigstock says, that these in some ways speaks of, they are beautiful and beautiful works of art, but there is something more here, as I can imagine if I place myself in Monet's seat and the smell and what that's like. I think sometimes it's easier for us to do this as Christians with these images of the Annunciation, and you have a whole church. I got a little tour of this, a whole church filled with these beautiful works of art which speak to us out of our own spirituality. But I really want us to think deeply, or in a deeper way, about how these have repeated. And is there more there than simply a rendition of someone's idea? What is the artist's experience that's being invoked by that, versus us just simply looking at it as a story? And so for fun, just to continue to play a little bit with the ideas of repetition, and I want to do Percy Granger. Do you all know anybody know Percy Granger's work? Yeah. So Percy Granger's Scotch Strathspey and Reel, it comes deeply from What to Do with a Drunken Sailor, right? So I'm going to show you, right, how this repetition is actually played out, this time not just in haystacks but in music. So we'll just do a little bit of each one so you get a sense of it. I know you all know, you could probably do What to Do with a Drunken Sailor right now for me, if I just asked you. Oh, now let.
What will we do with the drunken sailor? What will we do with the drunken sailor? What will we do with the drunken sailor? Early in the morning. She rises way, she rises way, she rises early in the morning.
Right, good. Okay. I don't think we need to get into shaving his belly with a rusty razor, which is the next line. Now, this is what Percy Granger does. It's a very old piece, right? But what does he do? So we'll listen to this. This is Percy Granger's piece done just with the...
Thank you very much. That was a long afternoon. The band, this one he didn't write for me. The band.
Oh my gosh, he talks for so long.
Just sitting there.
Great piece. All of that's on YouTube if you want to go look it up. And all you have to do is hit in, search for Percy Granger's Drunken Sailor, and you'll get all of those. But it really, for me, is just an amazing sense of a piece that, whereas we might see some industrial repetition, if you will, pull away, actually what Percy Granger does is to reinvent, to remake, to have it pull out of that more ancient piece, some really powerful, which I think is moving, can be moving music. This is a photo by Andrew Tarkovsky. Andrew Tarkovsky is probably known best for a film that he did called Andrei Rublev, which is the documentary of the great icon painter. But I want to kind of come to an end now with his thoughts, and then I want to open up for some discussion, which is a lot more fun than me just talking. Tarkovsky says, never try to convey your idea to the audience. It is a thankless and senseless task. Instead, show them life, and they'll find within themselves the means to assess and to appreciate it. For him, it could be iconic because if the world, and especially human beings, have been created in the image of God, then we can understand photography, he says, as continuing the divine creative purpose by turning everything into image, and even as helping to redeem the world by recovering its concealed, iconic character. So I'll leave you with this last picture by Freddie Fabrice. So this idea that the good, the one, or God is not divisible or communicable, and yet this simplicity is unthinkably shared and communicated through art. What would you all like to talk about? So I've rambled now for about 30 minutes. Where would you like to go? Where would you like to dig a little deeper? What would you like to know more about? What are you curious about? We'll just have some conversation. Yeah.
You talk about repetition, the art of repetition. So two questions about that. These are nothing original, and if repetition, if we were never there, for instance, Jesus' time, how are we repeating something that no one was really there to repeat? Just imagine.
So the question is nothing original? If it's all repetition, that's the first question. And the second one is, how do we know we're not just imagining something from before that may or may not happen? Well, see, for us as Christians, of course, we deeply come from a sense that's oriented around a God who creates all things. So everything is, for a Christian, repetition out of the prime mover's moving, right? So as we began to do and to make and to create all things, it's deeply always significant. See, that's what I'm saying. In an immanent frame, what you say is, oh, that's just that. It's just, this is just a phone. But nothing is just anything for a Christian who understands a theocentric or a God-centered world in which all things, all people, all objects are part of a greater cosmic acting on behalf of God. So yeah, it is always a partnership with God in creation. No matter how that is expressed, and I would say that, you know, you can imagine some of you are thinking, well, I can think of some art that definitely is not of God. But at the same time, that's the whole point of the cross, which is that God takes something which is completely over and against the message of mercy and love and forgiveness and turns it into an object of victory. And so in some ways, these deep themes, if we ponder them a little bit, I think does tap into our understanding as Christians. Are we just imagining? I think that we want to take the long view. You could rest on Hegel, you might rest on von Balthasar, some theologians who have specialized over the ages in terms of understanding of the Spirit's moving in and amongst creation. And so for von Balthasar, for instance, he would say that it's never just you imagining. You see, again, an immanent frame would say, oh, that's just me. That's just me thinking inside my head. But in a world in which the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is truly active, then we have to reject that way of thinking to understand that God is always moving in our thoughts and that our thoughts are real things. They're not just something that's hidden and private. It's an immanent frame which wants to remove you from a transcendent, mystical universe. Says, oh no, it's all inside of yourself. It's just your thoughts. It's not something that's not part of the greater whole. And so it is to say that I think in some way both our view of art and theology, even within the church, has become completely rooted in an immanent, kind of localized theology that basically says God's within you. So you get the ability to discern what is right and wrong all by yourself. You don't need anything outside of yourself. What happens when we do that is completely cut ourselves off, not only from society, from our neighbors, from the world, but also from God. So I actually would reject kind of both of those in that deeper theological sense. But I think art for art's sake and a modernism and a mechanical universe would say, oh no, of course, yeah, it's exactly, there are original things because you came up with them. They're not rooted in anything else. It's just you. And you have the power to discern all of that. So I think that's how I might play with that conversation a little bit. Yeah. Yes?
Can you say a little bit more about how art can be with us today to explain and encourage, help with the divisions, race, color, immigration, justice?
How can art help us with race, the struggles that we face today, race, injustices?
I mean, that's a big question.
No, it's a great question, and I've come prepared. So, so let me ask. I'm curious about this. Now, there's no shame in not raising your hand. I'm just curious. How many of you all have been to the Motown Museum here in Detroit? All right. Now, I just want so I guess you all need to make a pilgrimage then, right? So this is a great thing. So I came, And I'm confessing now, my recorder's off. I'm sure that Michael will never see this, our presiding bishop. I skipped a session to be able to ensure that I could go to the Motown Museum as a pilgrimage, so I could stand where Ray Charles and Aretha and all of them stood in those recording studios and to be a part of that. But here's the fascinating thing. They have a video at the beginning, and they talk about how in the midst of great racial division, the R&B movement coming out of Motown was talking about love and community and the rejection of war and violence as the key ingredients to what's going to make a civilized society. So there in the midst, right in the middle of Detroit, you have this powerful kind of image, and it was not lost on me to think about it that way at all, and the power of that positive, what that movement did. Now that came out of community, right? I mean, most of those people were all neighbors, living right around there. They all many of them went to school together, and they invested in one another to help them get ahead. Right? So they took a bunch of they talk about taking a bunch of high school students and preparing them to meet the queen is what their goal was. So it's just to say, I think that art has a power, if we will but enter into the story and narrative that's being expressed by others. So you have some really powerful artistic movements here in Detroit, even right now. And so one of the ways to do that would be as a community to venture out, to participate and listen, even as offensive and kind of off-putting as they might be to other people's experience of the world, rather than denying that reality, rather instead to enter into it and participate in it. And I think it's actually in the conversation between that gulf, across that gulf, that other things begin to happen. You know, I don't think that you can program it. I don't have that sense of it, but I do have a sense that powerful art, when people who will venture beyond their comfort zone can sit and be together in conversation, that it can really do some amazing things. Now I have time for one thing. He's going to cut me off. One last question. Yes.
This is a very broad question, but I've always felt that artistic talent was definitely a godly gift. I was definitely passed over. I took a drawing class and I couldn't do anything. But I'm just curious as how, I mean, we're looking at other people's expression of the way they see life and look at it. But what about the rest of us? I mean, we're here to appreciate it, but what do you think about that gift and how so many people are able to do something like this and so many people can't?
So the question is, you know, what about the rest of us who may not have an artistic bone in our body, as some people might say? I'm not sure that I'm willing to limit art to three-dimensional, two-dimensional music or expressions in dance, for instance. And by that, I think there's an art of conversation. There's an art of making community. There are many ways in which art is expressed. So I would rather kind of talk about what is your vocation, to begin to see that, yeah, that's art, that's how we define it in a secular society, but that as Christians, we actually are artists, that you just may have a vocation that makes that art in a very different way. That the meticulous nature in which the altar guild feel as though they are undertaking a spiritual exercise of setting out elements, for instance, is a great example of where those two things, or the art of being able to read the scripture and worship, the art of, Sarah Miles says, taking the communion table and turning it into a feeding table for the hungry. Her art is service in the world. And so, you know, I just would say that, you know, how are we making community that reflects the Trinity and the Godhead? These are bigger questions for us to ponder, and maybe not to reject so quickly that you have no artistic bone in your body, but to rather wonder what is the artistic bone that we've been given. Thank you all for today and for your
Tune in next week when we'll have the introduction to the course. So, the last two sessions.